morality for someone else, because when I think of somebody that I want to teach my children, I don't want them to be murderers or pedophiles or to steal, things like that. Those kinds of things bother me. What they do in their personal life does not bother me at all. So,
and if you look at these cases across the country, especially in the educational context, the invocation of these morality clauses as justification for terminating teachers tends to be exactly along those lines. Crimes have been committed in one respect or another.
One thing that Greg mentioned and what he sent in is that he looked through his contract and could not find the morality clause. Now, obviously not being privy to the specifics of MCCSC, you wouldn't know much about that, but you mentioned unions negotiating the contract. Have any teachers' unions brought that up as a negotiating point and said, this has been used to discriminate against, queer instructors, maybe other groups of instructors, and that's unacceptable? And if you know of any of that, how have those battles gone?
I don't know. I don't know of any of that. Although, I do know that teachers' unions across the country have been very instrumental in pushing school districts to adopt non-discrimination policies where that's happened. So they are sort of proactive often on that front. I don't know about what they bring to their actual negotiations and determining whether or not that clause is going to be there. And it would be, in a lot of respects, I think teachers' unions probably want clauses like that in effect, because they don't want teachers who are criminals or pedophiles and the other examples that Helen was raising. And it would be challenging to sort of specifically exclude all the things you don't want covered while leaving the things you do want covered. And that's part of the reason it's left that vague.
it seems to me in all of this that it kind of falls in the laps of parents to step forward, talk to their school boards, and then the school boards negotiate. I mean, somebody has to take action to make things better. Now, I happen to know an area where there are a lot of teachers who really, really have a lot of stress in their personal lives because they're great teachers and all the students absolutely adore them. But if anybody really finds out about them, they're gone. And I mean, they would be harassed to the point where they would have to be gone. And no one should have to work in that kind of level of stress. And so it sort of falls to the community, to me, to well, I suppose when you have a conservative community, they want to impose their what they define as morality. But how easy is it? We won't talk about cost, but for a family, say, to take action in a community and say, okay, we want we want these clauses put in there to protect people, not to harass people.
How
easy would that be? If I were a parent and I knew that my child had a teacher that was gay or lesbian, and I wanted to protect them, not get rid of them, but protect them.
But protect them,
yeah. Right.
But in conservative communities, I think you'd be in the minority. But there actually are instances
Oh, I am.
of that very thing happening when gay teachers across the country have been harassed, or groups of parents have sought their termination. In many of these instances, the communities have rallied around these teachers. The students have passed petitions in school to keep them on staff, and parents have rallied around them to protect them. So it happens, but it takes strong people to do it, especially in conservative communities. It's always difficult to be the minority voice, and often that's what these folks are doing. They're being the minority voice, and it takes a lot of fortitude, I think, to stand up and do that, but we're seeing it happen more and more.
I have a friend who teaches in a rural school, and they told me about an instance where they were having a discussion with one of their students about Valentine's Day, and the student asked them what they were doing, and based on the gender of their question, it was very obvious that they presumed they were homosexual. Now, they're not out at work, but their students knew. If an instructor was not out, if an instructor was being very professional and discreet and not, being forward with any of that information, but certain people in the environment began to suspect, how much power would they have to invoke one of those morality clauses?
Well, it seems to me that being gay and being out is not immoral.
Well, yes,
right.
but in a conservative
community. Even in a conservative community. If we look at the cases that have come about under the morality clauses, they tend to be conduct-based. as opposed to identity-based. So I think that would be a struggle. And again, those sort of morality clauses are going to have to be balanced against First Amendment rights and equal protection rights. I mean, a teacher has the right to express his or her identity. Now, and we can talk in more detail if you want to about First Amendment protections, but it depends on what's being said and where it's being said. You know, outside of school, teachers have the greatest First Amendment protections. You know, on campus, you know, a little less so. In the classroom, even less so. So it's going to be very fact-based, very fact-sensitive, very dependent on context. But in responding to those questions, I certainly don't think it would rise to the level of being immoral. And I think your question illustrates what a lot of people don't understand, too. Not being out is difficult to do. You know, you really have to censor what you say when you discuss what you did over the weekend. You know, what your family looks like, who your family members are, how you celebrate the holidays, all of these things. Having pictures in your classroom. Lots of teachers have pictures of their families. You know, gay and lesbian teachers can't do that. You know, they have to actively hide that, and it makes it difficult.
Which in a way becomes visible in and of itself.
Right. And the other thing we have to distinguish, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here with you as and your listeners, but you know, being out is not about being sexual and talking about sex.
Right.
You know, it's talking about who you are as a person, and in the right context, that's perfectly appropriate. And you know, it's extremely important. You know, we're talking about all of these communities, but they have gay students too, and it's important to those gay students to have adult role models. And being out as a teacher can certainly help facilitate that process, as Greg has talked about when he's been here.
Right. It certainly makes sense to me, though, why so many teachers are afraid to. I mean, I could see a teacher starting a GSA in their school or letting the students do it and being a sponsor and not being gay or lesbian. That would probably be the ideal to actually get some kind of legal case going, I would think, because then there would be all kinds of insinuation and accusation that would be unfounded. But I find it very frustrating. It doesn't seem to me a morality clause should be this. A morality, I don't like that word. I'd like to have a different word. If we could think of a different word for that, because it seems to me it's not really, it goes beyond the bounds of being in the classroom, being a teacher. That your personal
Absolutely.
life is your personal life, and as long as you're not committing, crimes, felonies, let's put it that way, then you still are a representative leader for the students. And I wonder how much power, how much power does a city, a school board have as opposed to the state? For instance, Bloomington has protections, okay, but other towns around here don't. And so somebody's being hassled in another town, but are they gonna have to actually take that to the state legislature? Are they gonna have to push the case that far to protect themselves?
If they're being harassed, and they would most likely start in the courts in their county. And it's if they're seeking legal protections, you know, as to themselves in that particular instance, through a lawsuit or a similar mechanism, then that would be either, depending on what the claims would be, potentially federal court. Most likely, it would be locally. It'd start in the local courts, then it could go to the Court of Appeals and the Indiana Supreme Court and so forth. If you're talking about more systemic changes, then they would be working through their school boards and the State Department of Education and so forth.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank you very much. I find it very frustrating. There has to be more that we can do. I want to thank you, Sean, for coming in and talking with us. And Greg, we assume you're listening, and we hope you get well real soon.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Thank you very much, and we'll be seeing you again, it looks like March 20th, and we will be discussing the recent case of the journalism teacher in Fort Wayne who was almost fired for allowing an editorial in support of gays in the school paper. So I look forward to that discussion. It should be quite interesting.
Almost fired, I guess. Maybe they won.
Hopefully.